special session of the Independent School District 535 School Board is called to order at 6 o'clock p.m. on Tuesday, December 5th, 2017, in room 137 of the Edison Building. Present at the board table is Mr. Michael Munoz, Superintendent of Schools, and a non-voting ex officio member of the board. Also present is Ms. Wendy Edgar, the Assistant Board Clerk. Ms. Edgar, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Barlow.
Here.
Mrs. Becker.
Here.
Mrs. Marvin.
Here.
Mr. Slusner.
Here.
Ms. Seelinger.
Here.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Chair Workman.
Here. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
2.01, approval of the agenda. This is an action item. Mr. Munoz.
There are no changes to the agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. 7.01, approval of school district property taxes payable in 2018. Mr. Munoz.
Yes, at this time, I'm going to call Mr. John Carlson, Executive Director of Finance, will brief us on this agenda item.
Good evening, School Board. Chair Workman, Superintendent Munoz, thank you for letting me do the annual Truth-In-Taxation presentation for you tonight. I will try to be brief and then leave plenty of time for all the questions and public comment following. Wanted to start with a couple recent finance highlights, just so you're aware of some good news. First off, as you heard in the audit presentation a couple weeks ago, the unassigned general fund balance finished at $15.4 million. We had been telling you all through last school year where you were thinking it was going to come in at 15.1, so it came in about $300,000 better than we thought. We did receive a clean audit report on November 14th. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but as we saw in September when we contacted the counties, we discovered that the tax base has grown again. A good chunk of that's new construction, and a good chunk of that is inflation on current properties. Primarily, the new construction really helps out the current taxpayers by spreading the taxes out further. So at a Truth in Taxation public hearing, there's three things we need to do. The first is to talk about the current year budget. The next is we need to talk about the levy amounts, and then we need to allow sufficient time for public to make comments. As you know, we need to do this meeting once a year between about November 24th and December 28th. It needs to start at 6 o'clock or later. School district levy cycle. So the levy that you will be asked to approve before the winter break here next week will be for taxes payable in calendar year 2018. So homeowners will pay those bills in May and October. The county will send those monies to us. But one thing a little bit different than the city and county, we're not supposed to use that money until July 1st of 2018 because this is money for our 2018-2019 school year budget. So let's talk about the 2017-18 school year budget. Unlike the city and the county, we can't necessarily talk about our next year budget yet because it's too far out in the future. We are working on the 2018-19 budget, but it is really rudimentary at this point, and we don't have a lot of specifics to say about it yet. So on the revenue side of the budget, last year, the first column, the approved budget for 2016-2017, $308.4 million. That's all of our funds. Obviously, our biggest fund is the general fund, where we do most of our spending and receive our state aid and our property taxes to support ongoing operations. That's $219.9 million of that. When we tallied it all up and closed the books for the year, we came in at $303 million in revenues. And then back in May, you approved a budget for the current school year we're in today at $283.7 million. On the expenditure side, last year we had an approved overall budget of $325.3 million. Obviously, that number was slightly higher than the revenues coming in. That's normal because we're usually spending some leftover monies from the previous year, allowing sites to spend carryover funds. We have construction projects in process, so we're usually assuming we're going to spend all those, and then we see where we end up. That's the actual column. $305 million is what we spent of the $325 you had approved to spend. And then the budget for this current school year is $294.3 million. I'll just point out there is a zero there in building construction. When we asked you to approve the budget back in May, we hadn't made up our final decision on the Hoover construction projects. We didn't budget anything for that until we knew you had given the 2 thumbs up on that project. Our reserves, at the end of June, for last school year, we ended with $65.7 million in reserves. 20.5 of that was in our general fund. The unassigned portion, which I told you earlier, was 15.4 of that 20 million. I don't have that number on the screen. And then if we spend everything that you've approved this year, we'd end at $40.3 million on the next June 30th, of which 16 million of that will be in the general fund. So let's talk about the 2018 proposed levy. I think we've seen this graphic before. We basically receive property taxes to fund 3 kind of major categories or buckets. The general fund, again, that's where our primary operations are going: teacher salaries, buses, utilities, things like that. Community service fund supports preschools, early childhood, family ed, adult basic education. And then debt service. So anytime we issue bonds, the voters approve bonds, they need to be paid back. We need to set a levy in the debt service fund to make those bond payments or risk defaulting on that debt. So if we compare 17 versus 18, if we just look at the bottom line, the actual levy was $53,900,000. Next year, we're proposing $52,700,000, so that's a decrease of $1.2 million, a decrease of 2.2% of total dollars coming to the district. Primarily, what's being adjusted is in the general fund in the long-term facility maintenance category. So we're not suggesting that we have less money for teacher salaries and utility bills, but we are suggesting to spend less money on those long-term deferred maintenance types of projects next year. As far as how we calculate the method, this is something I started showing last year just to remind people that our levy is mostly calculated based on the number of students we have. So 58% of the levy is just the dollars the voters have approved, the dollars the school board has approved per pupil, times the number of pupils. So if you have more pupils, then the levy goes up from there. If you have less pupils, then it actually goes down. We haven't had a declining year in over 5 years, so it does keep creeping up there. And then 39% of the levy is based on expenditures, approved expenditures. So there's certain categories you can levy money for based on how much you spend. MDE tracks that. They set the formulas. They know what you can spend. They make sure that you don't overspend or they'll take money away from you. And that's 39%. So that just leaves a small little sliver that's actually based on the amount of value of your houses and the number of people that live within your school district. And that's just to fund some early childhood programs in community ed. That has nothing really to do with our day-to-day K through 12 education. That's just community ed that's funded based on the tax base and the population. This slide just breaks down, it's the same levy, $52.7 million, and really what all I'm trying to show here, it's a little complicated to read maybe, but referendum market value is just one way of spreading the taxes, so about half of the levy gets spread on referendum market value. Referendum market value throws out cabins and agriculture properties, so those properties don't have to pay the tax on the referendum calculated levies. Net tax capacity is just another way of spreading the levy, and that levy is intended by the state to hit farms at the lowest level, homes at an average level, and businesses is basically 2 times the home value. So disproportionately, I guess, they're trying to make sure that businesses are fronting more of the cost versus the homeowners in that category of taxes. Briefly had mentioned this, but these are the 3 major deals that are affecting our property taxes next year. Again, we're recommending a $1.6 million reduction in long-term facility maintenance, primarily because of the Hoover project, and we shifted other projects around to make everything fit. Pupil unit increases, so part of that $1.6 million is being offset by more students projected in 18-19. And then the voters had approved inflation on the 2015 referendum, and that's causing a $13 per pupil increase. So those 3 things account for 85% of the year-over-year change. And then there's a whole bunch of little miscellaneous adjustments that are normal every year that MDE makes for us. So just wanted to briefly again say the tax base expanded 7.9%. $300 million of that was new construction. $640 million of that was inflation on existing properties. So about a third of that was new properties, so that helps spread out all the taxes that we are levying to new taxpayers. This is going to be a little bit harder to read from far away, but the gist of this is just wanted to show that for our homeowners, they're looking at about an 8 to 9% decrease. So if their house property didn't change in value, their taxes are going down somewhere in that 8.5% range. If their house went up in value a little bit, potentially they might be even, but there's a gentleman here a few minutes ago that was showing me his tax statement. His value of his house had gone up $7,000, but his tax was still going down, so on the school side. So, you know, if it went up a little bit, you're probably still seeing a decrease in the school taxes. On our businesses, again, they're looking at a 9 to 10% decline. I know that some of the businesses were re-evaluated or the property values went up, so that might offset some of the decrease, but if it happened to stay the same, it's probably about a 9.5% decrease. And then our farm properties, this is the second year in a row of a double-digit percentage decrease for the few farm properties that we have in our district, and that's primarily in the Wabasha County area, but that's good news for them too, that, again, double-digit, almost 12% decrease in their tax. This was new that I put in last year, just trying to compare Rochester, a $200,000 home in Rochester versus a $200,000 home in a district right around us. As you can see, we're near the bottom. So if we're benchmarking against reasonableness, we actually dropped a spot. Stewartville leapfrogged ahead of us. So basically that's saying if you were to have a $200,000 house in Stewartville, you are going to pay more in school property taxes for a Stewartville home than you are for a Rochester home. Zumbrota-Mazeppa is the district that's the highest cost to live nearby us. And then just to see, is it reasonable where we stand as far as our size of districts? So looking statewide, these are the 2 districts bigger than us and the 2 districts smaller than us in terms of student count. And you can see we're at the bottom of the list, same place we were last year. If you're going to have a house in Woodbury, it's going to basically cost you 2 times what it would in Rochester on the school tax. That is it. It is time for the board to be able to ask some questions. And then when you're done, I can step aside and we can let the public make their comments.
I have a question.
Sure.
Could you maybe explain why there might be such a big difference between Rochester and South Washington County on the school tax on this last slide?
Well, I know that they just passed a levy, maybe 2 levies this fall. They had a couple things on the ballot, so that's probably the biggest reason. Okay. I don't know if they were second on the list last year or, you know, if they went to the number 1. I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but.
Mr. Smith?
Anytime we go down, it's a good thing in terms of impact onto the taxpayers. So getting taxpayers are getting good value for the education we're providing our kids.
Ms. Becker?
So, John, can you tell me a little bit more about the shifting of the various projects, the long-term maintenance stuff?
Sure. So we knew that we couldn't do as many things when you're trying to do a major renovation and an addition onto one building. So I think we tried to move some dollars of other projects and shift them into maybe the 19-20 school year instead of doing them in the 18-19 school year, so we could focus primarily on the Hoover project.
Okay.
Any others? Ms. Marvin?
I absolutely agree that if we can reduce taxes for people, that's a good thing. But if we didn't reduce by 2.2%, hypothetically, what could that revenue be used for?
So the revenue, we're limited in where we can raise taxes. Just there's very few categories, and the biggest one is in that long-term facility maintenance revenue. So we made a conscientious decision to not have as much money coming in for that one category next year. But we could not just raise it or keep it even and just say that goes to operations, extra busing services, extra teachers, those types of things. That would have to come through a voter-approved operating referendum.
We could use the money, though, for facilities.
We could. So we could have made the decision to keep that money or try to keep the levy at least even, and we could have applied more towards maintenance projects. You're absolutely right. It's too late to do that now because we already set the maximum number in September. But at that time, we could have gone with a higher number. Actually, for long-term facility maintenance, we probably would have had to set that number back in June. So the cycle here is it's always one thing, and the dates don't line up perfectly, so we have to set a number earlier in the year, and then we get our numbers in September, and now here we are in December, and now maybe we wish, or maybe you wish, or somebody wishes, we could have had more in that one category, but we would have needed to decide that 6 months ago.
So the $52.7 million for the proposed levy payable in 2018, that amount is set by MDE, is that correct?
Correct.
And that's the highest amount that we could levy?
That's correct. We took the maximum that was on their printout, so we can't go a dollar above that. We couldn't have in September. Again, some of those decisions need to be made. Now we're talking 6+ months ago. So
I don't mean to put you on the spot. So if you want to take a pass, I'm very happy with that. Do other governmental agencies have the same kinds of restrictions posed on them for how much they can raise property taxes or levy for? Do you know?
Generally, my understanding, not being an expert, but having lunches sometimes with the city and the county finance directors, they do have more flexibility than the schools. They can almost name your own price, so to speak. So if they need 9% more, they can put 9% more. Ours is a whole series of complicated formulas, and then when you can't live within that, you have to go to the voters, and they have to say yes or no.
And then are we levying at the maximum for the school board levy that we're allowed to do?
You are levying the maximum you're allowed to do, correct.
I mean, and that was a big help for us from MDE or whoever made that
Correct,
decision.
correct. I will need to, it might be next summer, or maybe it's the summer after that, but we'll need to come back to you, and you'll need to reauthorize that for 5 years. So there's your warning on that, that we'll have an item about that coming.
Thanks, John.
Thank you very much. It looks like it was so easy to put together, but I know it wasn't, and it took hours, and we really appreciate the effort that you and your staff made putting this together for us. Thank you. (7.02) at this point, we will have comments from the public, if anybody wishes to comment. The guidelines are for you to state your name and address when you come to the podium, and limit your comments from 3 to 5 minutes. And so would anybody wish to speak to the board? Going. In that case, we will move on to 7.03. The property tax levy for school district property taxes payable in 2018 will be certified by the school board at its regularly scheduled meeting on December 12th, 2017 at 5:30 p.m. Questions, comments on that? Okay. This meeting is adjourned at 6:20 p.m.